Fala galerinha do Blockstream, tudo bem? Aqui é Leonardo Cavalcante, sou jornalista do portal. Hoje, nesse Block Insider, eu estou com Samson Mow, um grande empreendedor na área, no setor de cripto, mais especificamente em Bitcoin. Foi um dos arquitetos por trás das Volcanos Bonds em El Salvador. A gente vai discutir um pouco sobre o Bitcoin e o impacto na área macro e a adoção em grandes países, né? Como que a gente poderemos ver uma hiperbitcoinização. Hi Samson, nice to meet you and thanks for coming in our podcast.
Nice to meet you too, Leonardo. It's good to be here.
So first, I'd like to know, we like to ask for our guests how they enter this market, how they encounter to Bitcoin, and what's your journey on this Bitcoin world?
Sure. So I just read about Bitcoin. That was my journey. This is probably 2013 or so, and I don't think there were so many media properties talking about Bitcoin, having podcasts and things like that. So I was just reading about it on my own, and I found it very interesting, especially the mining part. And I started playing with a little bit of mining myself, but it was too late to mine with a laptop at that time. And then I guess my formal entry into the space was when I joined BTC China. It's one of the biggest exchanges in China back in the day. And I was the COO there for 2 years and some odd months.
Right now, you are CEO in the JAN3, right?
Yeah, I'm the CEO at JAN3. Yeah.
JAN3, okay. And what does the JAN3? What JAN3 does?
Yeah, so JAN3 is a Bitcoin technology company. We are also the developers of the Aqua Wallet, which is a liquid layer 2 wallet. And we do nation-state advisory, advising governments around the world on implementing Bitcoin strategies for their country to generate prosperity and a renaissance.
Mm-hmm. And you were the guy who simply helped El Salvador to create the Volcanos Bonds, right? How was the process of the structuring the Volcan Bonds? How were you called, and how did the entire process go?
Right. So the volcano bonds originally started as a meme. People were saying, well, if you're a Bitcoin country and you have Bitcoin as legal tender, then you should mine Bitcoin with your volcanoes, which El Salvador has many of them. And I actually helped formulate the plan to make it a reality. So I work with the Ministry of Finance in El Salvador, along with other people there, to create a structure by which they could actually tap into their geothermal reserves and mine Bitcoin with volcano energy. And the structure I created for them for the Bitcoin bonds was 50% of the investment would go into mining, which would pay a coupon on the bonds, and 50% would go into buying Bitcoin and holding it for a 5-year period, recouping the initial investment and then sharing the upside with the investors in the bond. So in some ways, it's a Bitcoin fixed income instrument. And it's a big game changer, I believe, because many countries that implement this structure can actually get out of debt, out of being under the foothold of the IMF or World Bank, whereby they have to keep on borrowing money to finance themselves and to service that debt. So if you're racking up dollar denominated debt, there is really no way out of it except for having a harder asset like Bitcoin. So it would be a massive change, I think, for countries in Latin America to adopt these Bitcoin bonds, because they can raise capital through the Bitcoin markets, right? Through Bitcoin investors and for institutions looking for exposure to Bitcoin, but as a sovereign debt instrument. And they could bypass the IMF and World Bank, and they could also pay off their existing debt by accumulating Bitcoin. But these bonds are denominated in dollars, so you're always going to be up ahead in dollar terms on the longer run. So I helped El Salvador put together the structure, and then the president and I announced that in, I think, November in 2021. It was supposed to have gone out in Q1 2022, and I think they're still working on it, but they have not yet launched those bonds. But what we have seen is an interest from other countries around the region to do something similar. So this is what we are focused on at JAN3, to create this sovereign debt Bitcoin instrument. If you will, it's sort of a micro strategy play for countries.
I think everyone was looking at El Salvador as a test drive for other countries to adopt Bitcoin, right? So how that's going? Do you think that El Salvador is advancing on Bitcoin adoption and making a statement for other countries? Like, do you think the other countries, not just in Latin America, but all over the world, will adopt Bitcoin, and why is that? If you could see that, why?
So I would say El Salvador is still doing very well in terms of Bitcoin adoption. I think it will be a massive change once they actually launch the Bitcoin bonds. If you look at the financials of it, I think in Q1 2022, Bitcoin was hovering somewhere around 41,000. And if they had bought $500 million of Bitcoin at that time, right now, today at $70,000, they'd be up, I don't know, $360 million. So you can see that it is a very practical idea to create this bond structure. And as you're saying, other countries are looking towards El Salvador to see if it's okay to adopt Bitcoin as a standard. And I think more and more regions are starting to view it as a viable strategy, especially with this new wave of institutional investments like the ETFs in the US and other regions now. So I think Bitcoin bonds are definitely back on the table. And it's just a question of which country is the first one now. Is it El Salvador? I don't know. Maybe it could be Argentina. So this is a very interesting time to be watching Bitcoin.
And I have to ask, because I saw your panel back in 2022, I think, on LabitConf in Argentina, arguing with Vitalik. I was in the front row. And you're a very Bitcoin maximalist, if I could say that. And why you're wearing a Tether T-shirt? What are your view on the Tether and his importance, the stablecoin's importance for the Bitcoin mass adoption?
Yeah, so that was a fun panel discussion, and maybe we'll do it again sometime. But yeah, I think I am a Bitcoin maximalist, but it depends on what you quantify as a Bitcoin maximalist. So is it that you're Bitcoin only and nothing else? Is it Bitcoin and practical things like dollars and stablecoins? I don't know. But it really depends on what your definition is. But stablecoins are a very important part of the ecosystem. I don't view them so much as a part of the crypto ecosystem like Ethereum or whatever, because stablecoins are obviously centralized. They're just running on rails like altcoin chains or side chains or things like that. And it doesn't really compete with Bitcoin. In fact, I see stablecoins as a support for Bitcoin, because much of the world, especially in LATAM, they do use Tether and stablecoins to save value. They don't necessarily know yet about Bitcoin, or they view Bitcoin as volatile. So they're seeking out this stable dollar denominated value. And for them, it's Tether. So it would be odd to try to get more Bitcoin adoption and not support stablecoins. And I think this is why most Bitcoin wallets have not succeeded in the market. If you look at success as broad adoption, mass market adoption. And this is what we hope to change with Aqua. So we're very much in support of Tether because we want to give people what they are using. So in my view, it's better that they're using USDT on the Liquid side chain rather than on Tron or Ethereum or Solana. But we are still interoperable with those. So we use SideShift and other swap providers to switch between Liquid and the other chains. But you can store Liquid USDT in your Aqua wallet. And I think this is a way for us to increase Bitcoin adoption. If you look at it at a very high level, we're kind of losing market share, or we're unwilling to get that market share of stablecoin users because maybe as Bitcoin maximalists, we think, oh, we don't like stablecoins. But if you look at it like without any bias, a stablecoin is just a dollar unit value, right? So there is no difference between supporting a stablecoin or supporting a US dollar bank wire in your app. Like, there's lots of Bitcoin only buy platforms, but they all support the dollar, whether it's Swan, River, or Strike. So if you're going to accept a dollar by bank wire, why can't you accept a dollar stablecoin transfer? It's the same thing in my book.
So moving on and heading the L2 Bitcoin ecosystems, right? Many people think that Bitcoin wouldn't make such a good currency, world global currency, because today on L1, I have to wait 10 minutes at time of a block to transact to have my transaction completed on chain, right? For that, we have L2s. And sorry, on L1, we have to wait 10 minutes. So on L2, like, Liquid and Lightning, it isn't a side chain, but with this kind of technologies, I could send Bitcoin in instance. So, what's your view on the layer 2 ecosystem for the hyperbitcoinization? Why they are so important for the world Bitcoinization, and how do you see that implemented on the world in a few years from now?
Right. So layer 2 scaling solutions like Liquid, like Lightning, and Arc, they're all things that allow us to use Bitcoin in daily transactions and in daily life. As you mentioned, on Bitcoin layer 1, you do have to wait 10 minutes, maybe more sometimes, and it's probably safer to wait for more confirmation. So layer 1s are really a settlement network. And it's going to be the higher layer abstractions of layer 1 that will allow global usage for 8 billion people. This is why for Aqua Wallet, we're building on both Lightning and Liquid. Lightning in and of itself is still not quite there yet, and it's questionable if it will be widely adopted by end users in a non-custodial manner. It's probably more likely that Lightning will evolve to be an interoperability layer between different things like Liquid, like eCash, mints, and other types of L2 sort of holding abstractions. So you can look at it, look at Liquid and eCash as ways to hold value and transact over Lightning down the road. But yeah, you kind of hit the point on the head, which is we do need layer 2 tech to scale Bitcoin, and I don't think it's a problem right now. I would say the thing that I don't really like is a lot of layer 2 projects are popping up, and they're more like altcoins than layer 2s. I mean, even Tron has said they are a layer 2 now. So at which point do you draw the line? But for me, if you launched a quote unquote layer 2 and you have some alternative token that you need to buy for governance or for whatever, then it's not really a Bitcoin layer 2. There should be no payment in a Bitcoin layer 2 outside of Bitcoin itself, and there should be no token issuance pertaining directly to transacting on that layer 2.
So today we have a country using Bitcoin as a currency, El Salvador. We have Bitcoin layers 2. We have wallets for this layer 2 on Bitcoin. We have less expensive fees on Bitcoin. So when we are going to see hyper-Bitcoinization, in your opinion, and what do you bring it to us? What do you kick off this hyper-Bitcoinization, in your opinion? The governments, the fiat going down, what's going to be?
All right. So I think it's all interconnected. So hyper Bitcoinization will be some factor of failure of fiat money. So it would be probably the dollar failing at that point. And we're seeing many fiat currencies show signs of failure or dysfunction. I mean, the Japanese yen is one. Yesterday, we saw the euro drop massively, but these fiat currencies are really just units of account at this point. They're really not mediums of exchange because they're locking down the system by which we exchange them. And using it for surveillance, and they're not stores of value anymore. So all of these fiat currencies are just hanging on by the skin of their teeth. They're about to fail, and when that hits a tipping point, we'll see hyperbitcoinization. So hyperbitcoinization is the point at which we don't need to convert Bitcoin into fiat currencies. And that's why the fiat failure or massive system overload is going to be the catalyst for hyperbitcoinization. But also, we need a lot of tech to support hyperbitcoinization, because if you're not moving out of Bitcoin into something else, then you need to use Bitcoin for payments. And this is why we need to develop these layer 2 solutions. We need friendlier, more accessible wallets for the average person. And there's a lot of education needed too. So this is why we're doing what we're doing at JAN3. So we're engaging with governments to position themselves ahead of hyperbitcoinization, where they have a reserve treasury in Bitcoin. But at the same time, they're working to educate their population, their citizens, on how to use Bitcoin. Because when we hit that tipping point and we start going parabolic and everyone wants Bitcoin because nobody wants the German mark, that means there are going to be a lot of scams and a lot of people potentially moving into other things like altcoins to scramble out of their fiat currencies. And that would not be optimal. So it's better to prepare ahead of time and get people educated about Bitcoin and ready to use Bitcoin before we hit that inflection mark.
Let me ask, you're ahead of the Bitcoin City too, or just it's a matter of talk of speak, but just the Volcanos Bonds, because Bitcoin City is a huge project on El Salvador too, right? How that's going?
Well, we had discussed with the government to build software for Bitcoin City, but I haven't heard much news about it in the last few years. Hopefully, with Bukele's re-election, that will get back on track along with the bonds, because both projects I view are very critical and very key to the development of El Salvador in the future. So I hope both projects do take off.
I don't know if you already told that, but how you're called by El Salvador presidents, right? How was the word as that interaction between you and Nayib Bukele? You met him. How was that?
Yeah, I met him a couple of times, but I'm more working with his team, like the Minister of Finance back then, and his brothers, more so.
And I'd like to know, it's a hypothetical scenario again, but in a case of hyperbitcoinization, what do you think is going to be the price of the Bitcoin, right? If everyone wants to use, and I know at this point we're not going to see in dollar, right? But in dollar, what is going to be the price by then?
Well, when you hit hyper-Bitcoinization, there will be no price of Bitcoin. It'll just be denominated in Bitcoin or in bits or in sats. So you won't have a dollar price. Probably just before hyper-Bitcoinization, you'll start to see Bitcoin at 10, $50 million a coin or something like that. But when you cross over hyper-Bitcoinization, that's when no one measures it in the fiat terms anymore. It doesn't make sense to. So yeah, to answer your question, you'll probably see it in the 50 to 100 million range per coin just before we flip over to hyper-Bitcoinized state.
And can you tell me about more news on Aqua Wallet? If your guys are uh, launched yet? No, oh no.
Yeah, we launched Aqua Wallet on January 3rd this year, and
Okay.
it blew away our expectations. We've seen a massive amount of users. I think we're at 27,000 now, and we haven't really been pushing it aggressively. You know, we talk about it on some podcasts, but the mass of the growth, the most of the growth is really organic through people spreading it through word of mouth. And then there's some people that really like the wallet, like BTC Sessions, Peter McCormack. They've been talking about it too. But yeah, so far it's been all organic. We're waiting for one key feature in our next big release. Then we'll probably do more aggressive marketing around it. But right now we're just kind of, putting it out there and fixing bugs and improving things behind the scenes. So one of the key design methods that we're using is to hide the complexity of the wallet. But to do that, we have to automate a lot of things like refunds and be able to process them without making the user overwhelmed by that complexity. So we're trying to streamline all of those functions in the back end before we push it out aggressively. But with our next big update, we'll have the ability to pay for Tether transactions with Tether itself. So you'll be able to receive liquid Tether in your wallet, let's say 100 USDT, and you'll pay 5 to 10 cents to transact it, to send it to someone else, without having to get liquid Bitcoin to pay for the network fees. And I think this is the big game changer, because it's the same problem for a lot of altcoin wallets that have Tether. You have to buy Ethereum to transact Tether, or buy Tron to transact Tether. And we think that this change will allow people to use Aqua very easily. And once you get into the liquid USDT ecosystem, you won't need to go out to other chains, because it's faster, cheaper, and more reliable than all the altcoin chains for processing USDT.
This would not affect the miners who receive fees in Bitcoin? Or?
Well, it would be on Liquid. So Liquid, the fees that are collected by the Liquid network pay for peg in and peg out transactions when people are moving Bitcoin out to the main chain or into Liquid. So it doesn't really impact the overall operation of Liquid, because we are still collecting the fee. We're just collecting it in USDT to make it frictionless for end users.
And it's the wallet to have a bigger focus on governments, right? Or a B2B, I could say that.
Potentially.
B2G, actually. Sorry.
Potentially. So back when El Salvador was preparing their Bitcoin law, they were looking at other companies to develop the Chivo wallet. And, a JAN3 wasn't formed at that point, but Blockstream was in the running to potentially do something, but the timelines just didn't work out. But now with Aqua, if let's say Argentina wants to adopt a Bitcoin standard and they want a government wallet, we could reskin Aqua, and the improvement over Chivo is that it would be non-custodial. So all users would have their own funds, but we can create the swap mechanism from Bitcoin to Argentinian pesos for the government, so that they can make it cheaper for people to swap in and out of pesos to Bitcoin if they wanted to. This just as an example. But having Aqua, it can serve that B2G opportunity if it were to arise. And there are some governments that do want to have their own wallets just to make it cheaper for people to swap. I think that was the main motivation for El Salvador to launch Chivo. They wanted it basically free for the people to swap from Bitcoin to dollars, and to make it accessible to everyone in the country.
And JAN3 are talking with any other governments. You said Argentina, it was an example, but you're talking with some other governments around the world to implement Bitcoin on their currencies.
Yeah, so last year we met with the president of Colombia, president of Suriname, but there's a new election coming up, I think, next year, and my friend Maya is running for president there, so that will be interesting. We also met with the Prime Minister of Montenegro through Prince Philip from our team. So we do have a lot of inroads, and this year we're trying to arrange a few more meetings, but it's just been really busy with Aqua launch and making sure that it's working properly. So we've kind of put the nation state initiatives on the back burner a little bit, just to focus a bit more on Aqua, but it's still important. And I think especially at this point, it makes sense for the countries to adopt Bitcoin, because if you look at the adoption curve, more and more institutional investors, pension funds, they're all scooping up Bitcoin, and it doesn't make sense for governments to miss this, especially governments in LATAM that do have to deal with debts. So I think Argentina would be the perfect place for Bitcoin treasury strategies, because Milei wants to get out of the situation with the debt. So Bitcoin would be the way to accelerate that timeline. He said something like 20, 30 years to fix the situation in Argentina. But I think with Bitcoin adoption there, you could shorten that timeline to 5 to 10 years if you play your cards right. So we're hoping to get that meeting with Milei
some
sometime and pitch him the idea of Bitcoin bonds.
And I was about to say that because the Argentina it's easier now with Milei in the president, right? Being president, because he's very friendly with Bitcoin, right?
Well, he understands money, unlike a lot of people. So already we're halfway there. I think he wants to be impartial and deregulate money. So you can use Bitcoin for payments and to settle contracts in Argentina right now. But I think he'll have to make a decision eventually whether he's going to embrace Bitcoin or try to stay neutral. But it's really difficult to stay neutral with Bitcoin, right? You can say we don't want to be partial to Bitcoin, but you can't have a Bitcoin treasury in your national reserves without saying that. So sometime in the next couple of years, Milei is going to have to decide, is it Bitcoin or is it debt?
Mm-hmm. And now with the U.S. election, the Donald Trump and Kennedy Jr. are also very friends with Bitcoin. Do you think that is a marketing strategy, or really, if one of them win the election this year, this potentially could bring Bitcoin closer to be more adoption in the U.S. because it's the largest economy in the world, right? So it would be huge.
It's difficult to say. I mean, it can always be a marketing strategy because they know the Bitcoin savvy demographic is an important demographic, and they know there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the status quo and how the SEC has been handling everything, and the fact that people are getting poorer and they're looking for ways to protect their savings. So it's definitely something they should be saying. Whether they follow through or not, that's always a question mark, right? In any country. But I think the change in discourse by which politicians are putting Bitcoin front and center is an important one, because that changes the entire dynamic around Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not about people buying drugs or being used by criminals anymore, which was the prevailing narrative for a very long time and still being pushed by the likes of Elizabeth Warren. But now Bitcoin is, institutional grade investment from BlackRock and from Fidelity and from Bitwise and all these other guys. And countries are buying it for their national treasuries. And it's a topic that politicians are now discussing actively. So I think this change is paving the way towards hyper-Bitcoinization, regardless if they follow through or not.
So we are still in the game theory, the theory of games, right? We are still seeing that around the world. We're still seeing big companies like BlackRock mine, so it will stimulate counters and even other big companies to buy it. Do you think this is it, or it's another phenomenon?
Well, I think it is the game theory playing out. You cannot decide that you don't want the hardest asset on the planet, right? That's just like saying, 100 years ago, you don't want gold. That's really not for you to decide as a government. You have to just understand what is money, what is an asset, and what do people want, and just follow on that. So the government mandated money era is coming to a close. That's the fiat money, right? We know that it fails on any reasonable time frame. All fiat monies fail. They all trend to zero. They all need to be rebooted. And we've seen this time and time again. There is no such thing as a government money that will survive. And now with Bitcoin, it's definitely a question of, can they convince people that they can do it again, right? Maybe the 50th time they'll succeed in making a fiat money that doesn't debase itself, but I doubt it. And with the optionality, people can choose to go into Bitcoin. They don't need to hope the government can fix the problem. They can fix the problem themselves by embracing Bitcoin. So that the timeline of fiat money is over, really. I'm just waiting for Bitcoin to reach that critical adoption curve, and it's really just the realization of the people, and that is what triggers hyper-Bitcoinization.
And do you think that is the biggest fear of the countries to adopt Bitcoin, or because talked to a lot of countries. You talked to El Salvador, you talked to Montenegro, like you said, and in your view, what's the biggest fear of them all in terms of adopting Bitcoin? Right? Is the loss of control of the popular control or anything else?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say there is nothing to fear about Bitcoin adoption. It's just like gold. Would you fear gold 100 years ago? You shouldn't. You should want it, not fear it. And the control that is exerted by governments and central banks over money is artificial. It's all done through mandates, and it does not work. So the question is, do you want to try again to exert control over the money supply? Because you should know that it would fail over the next 20, 30 years, and that failure timeline is going to increase as Bitcoin adoption increases too. So it's not like you're guaranteed to have another 100-year run when you make your new money, right? So I think the ultimate question really comes down to, are the politicians and governments interested in long-term prosperity for their country and for their citizens? That is the starting point by which these thought processes and discussions should begin. And I think one thing that sets President Bukele apart from others is he wants El Salvador to be prosperous in the future. And that is the guiding principle for the actions he's taking. Same with Milei. He wants to fix the situation in Argentina. And that is the guiding principle by which he's taking all these actions. Other politicians in other countries, for example, in Canada, like Trudeau, he's not trying to make things better for people in Canada. He's trying to go to climate change summits and world stages and take photos. That's his goal. If his goal was to fix the country, he would definitely be looking at what Bitcoin could do. And even at a simpler level, what is money and why is it so bad right now? Why is inflation skyrocketing? Why can people not afford their rent and groceries anymore, right? So it really comes down to where they're starting out from. And if they're able to put together a good team of advisors and people in business, industry, they should be able to figure out the path forward is some sort of Bitcoin strategy, whether it's mining Bitcoin, accumulating Bitcoin in their treasury, or Bitcoin as legal tender.
Yeah, I was about to ask something related with the gold, because not so long ago we had fiat currency backed by gold, right? Do you think it's possible to see fiat backed by Bitcoin? Because it's also a hard money. It's also a thing that anyway, it's similar to gold in many aspects, but it's new, it's better, it's improved. So do you think are we going to see any scenario like that?
Interesting question. So Michael Saylor has brought that up a few times. I think you could try to do that. And also Robert Kennedy Jr. has brought that up too. I think he was advised by some people to consider backing the US dollar with Bitcoin. These are interesting methods to get their feet wet and potentially start the Bitcoin adoption curve. But ultimately, I don't think it will work in the long run because you have two choices. One, you can use a currency backed by Bitcoin, or two, you can just have Bitcoin. I'd rather have the Bitcoin. So it might work. It might work for some time, but given there is real optionality for people, they can have the real underlying asset. I think it's more likely that that will be the dominant path that people take and countries take, rather than backing their currency with Bitcoin and trying to maintain that value and control and printing. Because on one hand, you're still going to have inflation through nefarious means, either through printing the money or other ways. Even if it's backed by Bitcoin, you can still print it. Or you will have just hard money and it'll be unchangeable and incorruptible. So, yeah, they can try, but it won't work in the long run. People will just gravitate towards Bitcoin.
And where do you think we are exactly on the adoption curve right now?
Well, I don't think the adoption curve is going to be slow and steady. Like it'll take 20 years to reach hyper-Bitcoinization. I think it's going to be very violent and change very rapidly. If you look at the signs in the market, it's everywhere. Like inflation is running rampant. They're trying to game CPI metrics by removing things from that basket of what is used for calculating inflation, right? Basically, if you take away everything you need to live, food, heating, housing, yeah, inflation's great, but if you actually do a real calculation, or even just buy something, eggs are more expensive, bread is more expensive, meat is more expensive. It doesn't take a government metric to tell you their inflation is good or bad. You can feel it yourself. And then you have debt. The US is probably somewhere close to 35 trillion in debt now. Interest payments on debt have eclipsed military spending. And that is only going to increase more and more because there is no way for them to pay down that debt. So the debt is just going to snowball. And at some point, they're going to have to default unless they switch over to Bitcoin very rapidly. But yeah, I think it's going to be a very rapid change in the next few years whereby everyone just moves to Bitcoin because there is no hope left in the existing system. It's not going to be gradual. And I think this is why we're trying as hard as we are to get countries onboarded to Bitcoin, because the faster they implement some strategy, some education campaign, the better it will be for those people because they won't suffer that demonetization event for when their currency goes to zero and they suddenly need Bitcoin.
So we had a guest on one of our lives a few weeks ago, and he said that the runes and originals are basically being stress test for Bitcoin network. Because if I want to Bitcoin, if I want to Bitcoin be the currency, the global currency, I have to test. I have to take a stress test on the network and see if it can hold. So with the runes and originals, we saw a huge impact on the layer one, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that? Do you think the runes could be a really good I don't know stress test for the Bitcoin, or it's just a bunch of bullshit?
It's a bunch of bullshit. I mean, there's no need to stress test layer one. We know it's not scalable, right? Even if you have gigabyte size blocks, it's still not scalable. So you can say we're trying to stress test it, but you're kind of stupid because we kind of know these things already. It doesn't take a genius to realize you can't scale a settlement network for payments. So if you want to stress test something, stress test the layer two, but that's not the point of these things. These things are meant to extract value from retail investors that don't know better. So if you do know better, you shouldn't be doing that. This is the definition of a scam, right? You should not be selling a vision to people that don't know better than you do. And I think these people that are developing these things, they know better. They're just not willing to give up the illusion because they want money.
So you think do you think that all of these new techs on Bitcoin are scams, or just the or just all of the new that came until now? Because like or not, it's a smart contract on the network, like okay. So do you think that could be useful for the network one day, or it's going to be just for building, like you said in your words, scams on the network, and meme coins and dog to them, I don't know where. And so anyway, do you think it will be a very useful technology, the smart contracts on layer two and on layer one, or you don't think that?
I don't think that. I mean, most things that are useful to Bitcoin, they're probably not going to make the people a ton of money really quickly. Like real scaling technologies, it's going to take time to develop. It's going to take time to roll out. It's kind of a joke to think that I can make some meme thing and it's going to help Bitcoin in some way. Like, it doesn't work that way. There's real proof of work in developing something meaningful and getting organic adoption. These things are more like pump and dump altcoins. They'll fade out over time. No one will care. I mean, if you look at ordinals, it's counterparty, but with a twist. There's always been something like that. And there will be something after that too. This is why we're Bitcoin maximalists.
Yeah, I think it's crazy because the mass adoption of the the biggest one. I don't even want to say the name, but the Bitcoin to the moon, right? The mass adoption is coming from Brazil. So Brazilians, I don't see Brazilians seeing the real value on the Bitcoin hard money asset, but seeing value on some digital asset inside the Bitcoin who can that can make them billionaire in a night, in one night. So I think I saw a bunch of people buying Dog to the Moon on Bitcoin, but not having Bitcoin. So it's a crazy thing to see here. It's a crazy movement.
It's not that crazy though. I mean, most people want to get rich quickly, and there's a big industry around the world for casinos, right? You can't compare I don't know, there's no analog comparison to Bitcoin to a casino. It's like people that want hard assets and go to a place together to meet, talk about it, right? There's nothing like that for a casino comparing, but there's hundreds and thousands of casinos around the world, right? And they're massive and they're beautiful and people will go there and they'll gamble. And that's really what this is. And I don't think it's anything different than a casino. You might get rich, but you're probably not.
Mhm. And I think for the final question, if you want to add something too, but don't you think that the government adoption, Bitcoin government adoption, I don't know, rip Bitcoin off the hands of the retails? I don't know if I said it right, but remove Bitcoin from the retail's hands and making the asset into a centralized currency, because if Bitcoin are being buying by many governments, many institutionals, are not Bitcoin centralized.
Yeah, that ship has sailed already with the institutional investments and the things like BlackRock and the ETFs. It's already done, right? We already see that they have a million in Bitcoin holdings, 1 million BTC. So a country buying it at this point it's going to be very difficult for them to reach that level even. So I think within a couple of years, we'll probably see the ETFs probably double to like 2 million, maybe 3 if they're really lucky. But the ship has sailed. Like there will always be essentially held Bitcoin with custodians, with governments, etc. But the most important thing is that people can still access Bitcoin without needing these entities. So that is the real key thing. And when a government adopts it, there's usually educational campaigns accompanying that, like in El Salvador. Now, if Chivo was non-custodial, that'd be even better. And I think this is what we hope to achieve with Aqua. We can work with governments to create non-custodial wallets for their people, where the government's not holding the money for them. But it's a question like what is the balance at the end of Bitcoin adoption? It's going to be like how much percentage will institutions have, ETFs, corporations, and governments and people. But the important thing with Bitcoin is that you'll always be able to have it in your own wallet without someone else holding it for you, and that's what matters.
Do you want to add something? I don't know. I think it's a nice thing that you tell more about what did you see on El Salvador, because I think you saw closer than me, than many people, the Bitcoin adoption in the country, right? You saw people starting to accept Bitcoin on their stores and movements like that. So if you want to add something, but I'd like you tell more about that experience.
Well, I think that's talked about a lot already, and people generally know there's a lot of organic adoption. But I think the most important thing is really other countries adopting Bitcoin, both at the top level and from the bottom up level. So initiatives like Bitcoin Jungle in Costa Rica are very important. Bitcoin Lake. Hopefully, there will be something in Argentina soon too. We're trying to spin something up. But all of these different expansions of Bitcoin adoption around the world in LATAM and other places are very critical. If El Salvador is the only country that has a significant Bitcoin adoption, then I don't think that will be sustainable. They'll be pressured by things like IMF or other supranational entities to stop doing that. But if we can get other countries to adopt, I think that solidifies Bitcoin adoption. And that's really, I think, the key takeaway here, and why we're so passionate about our mission to accelerate Bitcoin adoption, because we're trying to create more countries that are friendly to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin will grow in those countries to cover the whole world.
Okay, thank you very much, Samson.
Yeah,
it
thanks
was
to
a
you,
pleasure to having you in our podcast. If you want to add something,
Sure.
make yourself possible.
Yeah, you can look up more about JAN3 on X/Twitter. We're JAN3.com. Our website is jan3.com, and you can also find Aqua at aquawallet.io, or on X, we're Aqua Bitcoin.
Mhm.